Yesterday, a struggling single mother made a choice that cost her everything. She gave away her last meal.
He had more money than everyone in that building combined. But tonight, he was begging for scraps. The wind cut through the marble-lined street like a blade, rattling the polished glass of the most exclusive restaurant in the district. Inside, crystal chandeliers shimmered over tailored suits and silk dresses. Outside, on the cold pavement near the valet stand, sat a man in a frayed coat, his beard untrimmed, his shoes worn thin at the soles. People stepped around him as if he were invisible. A man in a $1,000 overcoat wrinkled his nose and muttered, "Pathetic." A woman tightened her grip on her designer purse. Someone tossed a coin that rolled past him and into the gutter. He didn't reach for it, he simply watched. Watched who slowed down. Watched who avoided eye contact. Watched who looked through him as though he were less than human. A security guard finally approached, irritation written across his face. "You can't sit here," he snapped. "You're bad for business. Move along before I call someone." The man nodded softly, eyes calm, almost curious. If they had looked closer, really looked, they might have noticed the sharpness behind his silence, the posture to steady, the gaze to deliberate. This wasn't desperation, it was observation, because the man they dismissed as homeless owned the building towering above them. He owned the restaurant, the valet company, half the investment firms funding the luxury cars pulling up to the curb. For years he had built an empire from nothing. An immigrant kid who once slept in a one-bedroom apartment with 5 relatives, who worked night shifts while learning the language by day. He had believed in merit, in fairness, in the promise that dignity mattered more than status. But somewhere along the way, the world he climbed into began to feel hollow. Handshakes felt rehearsed, praise felt purchased, loyalty felt conditional. So, tonight he stripped it all away. No tailored suit, no entourage, no title, just a man on the sidewalk, and one by one, the powerful revealed themselves until she appeared. A waitress from inside, still wearing her apron, exhaustion written into the curve of her shoulders. A single mother who counted every dollar before spending it, who skipped meals so her child wouldn't have to. She stepped outside for air, clutching a small container, her dinner. She noticed him, not as an inconvenience, not as a stain on the pavement, as a person. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and in that silence something shifted, because what she did next would shatter everything he believed about people, and leave him in tears. Asterisk. The first coin didn't land in his hand, it struck his shoulder. A businessman, Bluetooth still glowing in his ear, flicked it at him without breaking stride. "Get yourself something," he said, as if generosity could be measured in spare change. The coin clattered against the pavement and spun in dizzy circles before settling near the curb. The man on the sidewalk didn't flinch. He had been insulted in boardrooms with better manners than this. A young couple approached next, laughing loudly about a tasting menu that costs more than a week's groceries for most families. The woman glanced down at him and smirked. "Is this even real?" she whispered. "Half these guys fake it for sympathy." Her partner shrugged. "Yeah, they make more than we do sometimes. It's a scam." They walked past him, still laughing. Fake, lazy, scam. The words hung heavier than the winter air. A man exiting the restaurant paused long enough to deliver a verdict. "People these days don't want to work," he muttered. "Handouts ruined this country. As if poverty were a moral failure. As if struggle were contagious." Inside, through the tall glass windows, diners scrolled their phones. In another world online, the comments would be even colder. He should get a job. Stop rewarding laziness. If he's hungry, that's his fault. Digital judgment. Public performance. Outrage packaged as virtue. The security guard returned. Impatience sharpened into hostility. "I told you to move," he barked, grabbing the man's arm and yanking him to his feet. The sudden shove nearly sent him stumbling into the street. "You're scaring customers." Scaring customers, as if hunger were violence. The man steadied himself. For a brief second, something flashed behind his eyes, not anger, but recognition. He had seen this before, in different cities, outside different buildings he quietly owned. He had worn disguises in Chicago, in San Francisco, in Miami. Every time, the same pattern. A handful of people paused. Most accelerated their steps. Compassion had become inconvenient. He remembered when he first arrived in this country with nothing but a borrowed suitcase and an accent thick enough to invite mockery. Back then, strangers had helped him. A cashier who let him slide on a few cents, a neighbor who shared soup during a power outage. Small mercies that felt enormous. Where had that spirit gone? Or had success insulated him from seeing it? He sank back down onto the cold pavement after the guard walked away. He told himself this was data, evidence, a social experiment, confirming what he already feared, that wealth had hardened hearts. That status had replaced solidarity. Maybe humanity had an expiration date. Inside the restaurant, she wiped down tables with mechanical precision. Her manager had just informed her that tips were down and hours would be cut next week. Rent was due in 4 days. Her son's school had sent a reminder about a field trip. She couldn't afford. She hadn't eaten since morning. When her break finally came, she stepped outside, clutching a small plastic container. Rice, a few pieces of chicken. Not much, but enough to quiet the ache in her stomach. That's when she saw him clearly, not as a blur near the valet stand, not as an inconvenience, as a man shivering. She noticed the way he wrapped his coat tighter, trying to appear smaller, less disruptive. She noticed the coin still lying untouched near the curb. Her chest tightened. She looked down at her food. It wasn't extra. It wasn't surplus. It was all she had until tomorrow. For a moment, survival argued with empathy. Responsibility argued with instinct. She had a child waiting at home. Bills stacking up. A system that rarely showed mercy to women like her. She took a slow breath, then she walked toward him. She opened her lunch container, then paused. Because what she was about to do would cost her everything. She lowered herself onto the cold pavement without hesitation. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his face. Not just hunger, something deeper. A tiredness that didn't belong to the streets alone. She held out the container. "You look like you need this more than I do." He shook his head immediately. "No, I'm fine." It was instinctive. Pride wrapped in politeness. He had refused thousands of offers in his life, business deals, manipulations, disguised as generosity. He could refuse this too, but her hand didn't move. "It's okay," she said softly. "I was going to eat it, but I'll manage." "You don't even know me," he replied, searching her face for performance, for pity, for calculation. "I don't have to," she answered. A group exiting the restaurant slowed their steps. One woman nudged her companion. Is she seriously giving him her food? A phone lifted discreetly. The red recording light blinked on. He glanced at the container again. Simple rice, a few pieces of chicken, steam still rising into the night air. "You should keep it," he insisted, his voice quieter now. "You worked for that." She gave a small, tired smile. "I know what it's like to be hungry." There was no speech in her tone, no attempt to sound noble. "Just memory. I don't have much," she continued, her voice steady despite the tremor in the wind. "But I can't walk away." The words hit him harder than any insult had. He had built skyscrapers from spreadsheets, negotiated deals that shifted markets, and controlled rooms filled with senators and CEOs. But this simple sentence disarmed him. He had started this experiment because he no longer trusted kindness. After decades of success, he had become surrounded by applause that felt rehearsed, invitations that came with expectations, partnerships tied to profit margins, not principles. He remembered being a boy in a cramped apartment, watching his mother stretch one meal into three, remembered neighbors who had less than they did knocking on the door with bread during hard months. Back then, compassion wasn't content, it wasn't recorded. It just existed. Now, every smile felt transactional, until this one. His fingers trembled as he reached for the container. Not from the cold dot, from recognition. She noticed it. "It's okay," she whispered, misreading his emotion as weakness. "You don't have to be embarrassed." Embarrassed, if only she knew. Around them, whispers spread. Why would she do that? She doesn't look rich herself. That's probably her dinner. Someone muttered. People are too soft. That's why nothing changes. But she ignored the commentary. She sat beside him as if the marble floors behind her didn't exist. As if the laughter from inside meant nothing. He took a small bite. The food was ordinary, but something inside him broke open. No assistant arranged this moment. No media team scripted it. No donation announcement hovered behind it. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his net worth. She didn't know that the building towering above them answered to his signature. She only knew he was hungry. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice unsteady. She shrugged lightly. "One day, if you can, just do the same for someone else. Not repay me, repay the world." The simplicity of it nearly undid him. For the first time in years, he felt seen without expectation, valued without negotiation, treated as human without credentials. She stood slowly, brushing off her apron. The wind lifted a strand of hair across her face, and she tucked it back with a small laugh, unaware of the storm she had just set in motion. "Stay warm," she told him gently, and as she walked back toward the glowing doors of the restaurant, toward the system that barely paid her enough to survive, he watched her with eyes no longer testing the world, but questioning himself, because she had no idea who she was really feeding, and what would happen the very next morning would change her life forever. The next morning, her manager's tone was colder than usual. "Corporate wants to see you," he said, arms folded. "Apparently you were very, generous last night." Her stomach dropped. She had seen the phone pointed at her. She had heard the whispers. Maybe someone complained. Maybe giving away food violated policy. In places like this, kindness often did. Inside the private dining hall, a row of executives stood near the windows. The same security guard from the night before avoided her eyes. A few servers lingered in the corner, pretending not to stare. A manager smirked. Next time, maybe focus on paying customers instead of street projects. Heat rose to her cheeks, but she stayed silent. Then the doors opened. Footsteps echoed across the marble floor. She turned. The man from the sidewalk walked in, no frayed coat, no worn shoes. He wore a tailored suit that fit like authority itself. His beard was trimmed, his posture unmistakable. Behind him trailed members of the board, straight-backed and deferential. The room shifted instantly. The manager's smirk evaporated. The security guard stiffened. Silence spread like a shockwave. He stopped in front of her for a brief second there. Eyes met exactly as they had the night before, but now the truth stood between them. "I believe you've already met," he said calmly, his voice no longer quiet but commanding. Confusion flickered across her face. One of the executives cleared his throat. "This is the majority owner of this establishment, and several others in the district." The air seemed too thin. The manager swallowed hard. "Sir, we didn't realize that was the point," he interrupted gently. He turned back to her, ignoring everyone else. "For months, I've been conducting an experiment, sitting outside my own businesses, watching how people treat someone they believe has nothing." His gaze swept across the room who's failed. The words landed heavy, the insults, the assumptions. The coin thrown like I was an inconvenience instead of a human being. His eyes briefly found the businessman standing near the bar, who suddenly looked very small. He continued, voice steady but edged with something deeper. "I built my life from struggle. I was once the man outside the door. I told myself that success wouldn't change my values." A pause, but somewhere along the way I stopped recognizing who truly had them. He faced her fully now. "When you shared your last meal with me, I remembered who I used to be." His voice broke, not dramatically, not performative lie, just enough to reveal that this moment mattered. "You didn't know my name. You didn't know my position. You didn't know what I could give you. And you gave anyway." The security guard lowered his head. The manager shifted uncomfortably. The whispers from the night before now felt like accusations echoing back at their owners. She stood frozen, overwhelmed, unsure whether to apologize or speak, but he wasn't finished. He inhaled slowly, eyes still on hers. "And now," he said, turning toward the entire room, "it's time this company remembered what real wealth looks like." And then he made an announcement that left the entire room speechless. The room held its breath. He stepped closer to her, but his voice carried, "To everyone. Effective immediately," he said. "Her debts are paid in full." A ripple moved through the executives. She will be promoted to operations supervisor, with full benefits and salary protection. Her manager's face drained of color, and a trust will be established for her son's education funded personally by me. She blinked, overwhelmed. "So I didn't do it for I know," he replied softly. "That's why it matters." He turned slowly to the rest of the room, gaze steady, deliberate. "We measure success by revenue, by expansion, by quarterly reports." He gestured toward the polished floors, the expensive suits. But last night, the only person in this building who demonstrated true wealth was her. Silence tightened. "Character is wealth," he said, clearly, "and she is the richest person in this room." The words landed heavier than any bonus announcement ever could. He then addressed the guard. "Compassion is not a liability. If you represent this company, you will treat every person with dignity. Consider this your formal warning." The guard nodded stiffly. He looked to the manager. "Leadership without humanity is failure. Reflect on that. Public accountability. No shouting, no humiliation. Just truth, spoken where power usually hides behind policy." By afternoon, the video from the night before surfaced online. The clip of her kneeling on cold pavement, offering her last meal. Then the follow-up footage from inside the restaurant. His reveal. His words, it spread fast. "This restored my faith in humanity. We need more people like her. Kindness is revolutionary." Comment sections that usually bred sin carried something different this time: recognition, pride, a reminder that ordinary people still carried extraordinary values. Interviews followed, headlines followed, but she remained the same, soft-spoken, slightly uncomfortable with attention, insistent that she had only done what anyone should do. That was the point. In a culture obsessed with status, she had chosen solidarity in a system that rewards image. She chose instinct when the powerful performed indifference. She practiced empathy. He stood beside her during the press conference, but slightly behind, not as savior, as a witness, because the real transformation had not been financial, it had been moral. He had tested the world, and the world, through her, had answered. The smallest act, a meal shared on a sidewalk, had exposed the moral poverty of those who had everything except compassion. She once worried about rent and groceries. Now she carried something larger. Proof that dignity cannot be bought, only lived. And as the cameras dimmed and the headlines faded, one truth remained steady and undeniable. In a world obsessed with status, she proved that the most powerful thing a person can have is a heart. And the question is, if you were there that night, would you have walked past him too?